Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to the Water Exchange Speaker Series, The Water We Swim In, a discussion on water and equity. So I'm Crystal Pleasant, the Communications Manager of the Water Center at Penn. We are delighted to have such a dynamic panelist today. We're delighted to host a dynamic panel for you. Before we start, I do want to let you know that this event is being recorded and it will be posted on our website and social media for anyone who is not able to listen to the program today. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Water Center, we are an applied research center focused on solutions to urban water challenges. We offer a series of programs and publications, and we welcome anyone who is interested in urban water issues to learn, grow, and collaborate with us through projects, research, and programming. If you look at the screen, you'll see that we have our website, social media, and other contact information. We hope that you'll reach out to us and let us know if you're interested. Moving on to the program. In today's session, our panelists explore the connection between water, social justice, and public health to address the lack of access to water for recreation. You'll see we will have Andy Cricken, who is the Managing Director of Moonshot Missions, Clarissa Palmer, Esquire, the co-founder and executive president of We Can Swim, Victoria Prizia, founder and president of Habitat, Dan Shupsky, co-founder of We Can Swim and also with the Philadelphia Water Department, Karen Young, executive director of Fairmont Waterworks. One of our panelists, Victoria Prizia, recently said, the story of water is a story of social and environmental justice, as safe access to clean drinking, household, and swimming water is a current day issue for people living in America and around the world. We will hear about these stories in just a moment. We will begin by having each panelist introduce themselves and share why it's so critical to have the conversation about equity and water in their work. The remainder of the program will be a panel discussion with Q&A, and we really want to hear from you. So please ask your questions, but send them via the Q&A icon on your screen. Please do not type the questions for the speaker into the chat. You'll learn later in the program that we will put their contact information, as they will have some information that I'm sure you'll want to reach out and connect to them. We want to get to as many questions as possible, but we do know that some questions we just won't have enough time to. So let me introduce our panelists in speaking order. Karen Young is the executive director of Fairmont Waterworks. An educator, communicator, and entrepreneur, Karen has spent the last 2 decades educating students, teachers, and the general public about urban environmental programs with an emphasis on informal, experiential learning. She also serves in an advisory capacity to the United Nations Association of Greater Philadelphia. Following Karen's presentation, Victoria Prizia, an award-winning educator, designer, and lecturer, and the founder and president of Habitat, an interpretive planning and design studio based in Pipersville, Pennsylvania. For more than 15 years, Victoria has worked with cultural institutions and a diverse team of makers, thinkers, doers, and performers, crafting interventions, inspirations, and experiences to increase public engagement with our most essential resource, water. Most recently, her company has explored the state of the watershed in Philadelphia, helping key cultural institutions build active and more aware water stewards of all ages. Karen and Victoria are both the masterminds behind Pool, a social history of segregation, a multidisciplinary museum exhibition set in Fairmont Waterworks. Please save the date, March 22nd, the exhibit opens up, and they'll share more about that in their presentation today. We'll also have Andy Cricken following Karen and Victoria. Andy is a senior advisor at the Water Center at Penn, working on various projects related to the Delaware River watershed. Following a long career at the Camden County Municipal Utility Authority, where he recently retired as the Authority CEO. Andy is currently managing director with Moonshot Missions, a nonprofit focused on providing technical assistance to water utilities in underserved communities. He is also a senior fellow with the U.S. Water Alliance. Andy's committed to social justice with a particular emphasis on water equity. He serves as chair of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Advisory Council's Water Equity Committee, co-chair of the Jersey Water Works Water Equity Initiative, trustee of the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, and is a former director at the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. Following Andy, Dan Shupsky, a 2014 Penn graduate, joined the Philadelphia Water Department to do community outreach around green stormwater infrastructure being built through the Green City Clean Waters program. The Water Center, through our founder, Howard Newkrug, we know a thing or two about Green City Clean Waters. In addition to doing this engagement work, he also helps manage a small annual grants program groups to help beautify and monitor GSI called Soak It Up Adoption. Prior to this position, he was an assistant varsity swimming and diving coach at Penn, where he helped found and run We Can Swim. Clarissa Palmer Esquire, also a 2014 Penn graduate, is a Trinidadian American lawyer with Ropes and Gray LLP, who was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. At the age of 3, her parents enrolled her and her older brother into swimming classes, which planted the seed for decades of championship level competitive swimming. While attending Penn, Clarissa was on the varsity swim team and founded the organization We Can Swim. Clarissa's dream was to share her love of the sport with Black and Brown children in Philadelphia, while also addressing systemic issues like the lack of access to swimming lessons and high drowning rates within those communities. Dan and Clarissa will talk about their program, We Can Swim, which teaches water safety and social responsibility to underserved youth, specifically those of the African American and Hispanic communities who are disproportionately affected by limited access to water safety resources. We Can Swim opens up March 19th, please save the date. And we thank you all for being part of this program. I now turn it over to Karen.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I appreciate you and the work that the Water Center at the University of Pennsylvania is doing to spread the word about equity as it relates to water. And all of those behind the scenes helping to make this work, I appreciate your support there. And a grand hello to all of my fellow panelists. As Crystal shared, my name is Karen Young, and I'm the director of the Fairmount Waterworks, a historic structure. The Interpretive Center, which I run, is housed in the Fairmount Waterworks. And the story of water really begins at the Waterworks. And I hope all of you that have joined us this afternoon have some familiarity with the Fairmount Waterworks. We're talking about a grand expanse of Palladian-inspired buildings that have been a part of the Philadelphia landscape since the 1800s. And through 200 years, 3 centuries of public service, equity is built into our blood. So all of our programming that comes out of the Interpretive Center, out of the Waterworks, is built on the ideal that everyone, especially in Philadelphia, should have access to clean, safe, potable water. We echo the sentiments of the World Health Organization that says access to clean water is a human right. And we're talking about water for domestic use, for industrial use, for personal use, as well as recreational use. And those on the panelists and those on the panel, and especially my colleague and my friend Victoria, is really going to give you a sense of what that means as it relates to recreation. So the place-based education that we're working with at the Fairmount Waterworks allows us to use the architecture. One of the hidden gems in our space is an abandoned pool, or at least it used to be an abandoned pool. And as I hand this off to my colleague and my friend Victoria, she'll give you a little taste of what you can do with an abandoned space and what you can do to bring a community together around something that we all need to thrive and survive, and that's clean water. Victoria?
Thanks so much, Karen. Play from the start. So yes, I plan and design museum exhibitions and cultural activations with the goal of leveraging cultural resources for the public good, for the good of the natural world, and as agents of meaningful social change. And Karen Young and I have been working together for a number of years now on a variety of projects, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But Pool, a social history of segregation, as Crystal said, is a 4,700 square foot multidisciplinary museum exhibition. And it's set in the Fairmount Waterworks, where Karen has been leading the way and engaging the public with our precious waterways and sources of drinking water. Pool investigates the role of public pools in our communities with the goal of deepening an understanding of the connection between water, social justice, and public health. And this is a very real connection. And this connection felt very urgent to me in 2015, 2016, when I began thinking about this project. I had just finished two books. One is The Blue Mind by marine biologist Dr. Wallace J. Nichols. Some of you may be familiar with that, with this book. But basically, it's an incredible book that really explores through scientific research the significant effects of water in all of its shapes and forms on our health and well-being. And coupled with that book, I also had come across a book called Contested Waters, A Social History of Swimming Pools in America by Dr. Jeff Wiltzes, published in 2010. And Dr. Wiltz's work really inspired this project. And he was the first to write a comprehensive history about swimming and linking it to the current day implications of this history of segregation in terms of the disparities of drowning and swimming abilities in Black and Brown communities. And at the same time, right around this time in 2016, following the presidential election, some of you may remember this moment in time where there seemed to be a floodgate opening, where there were all of these acts of aggression in public spaces based on race. And so this project really welled up from a sense of urgency and something related to swimming, which has always been dear to me. I started swimming when I was 6 months old and started competitively swimming when I was 7. So pools and swimming and water have always been a comfort. And to understand through Dr. Jeff Wiltz's work that so many people were intentionally denied access to such a comfort, something that felt like freedom to me. It just felt really important to do something. And this, of course, builds on the work that I've been doing over the last 15 years with environmental justice, which of course is totally related to social justice. But Pool, as these images show, weaves together history, site-specific artwork, storytelling, scholarship, and place-based learning. Through an inspiring collective of artists, swimming champions, aquatic activists, researchers, and scholars, Pool invites visitors to challenge personal assumptions about the act of swimming together. It encourages the examination of the role of public space in civic life today and in the building of healthy communities and individuals. And most importantly for me, it really illuminates the ongoing failures of democracy. It's an example of what are the implications of structural racism, and that we have answers. And the answer is quite simple, and it relates to some of our guests that are speaking in a minute or two in terms of teaching people how to swim. It's a challenge that we have the answers to already. And you know, in this challenge where ordinary people are really pushing and pulling, you know, to create a more just world. So in addition to the exhibition, we also have poolphl.com, which includes 95% of all the content. We also created a magazine. The magazine allows some of our featured speakers who have devoted their lives to this work in terms of building access to aquatics for all. And then also we're really happy to announce that we're going to be doing activation series this summer with special guests, curators, Homer Jackson and Valerie Irwin. And we'll have live performances 6 Saturdays between July and September. And we're really excited, called Splashing Concessions. And we can talk a little bit more about that later on.
Great. Well, so you're playing the video now?
So here's a trailer for the exhibition.
Kids are going to get near water no matter what. We can't change the fact that kids are going to want to get near community pools, and that's where they're going to start to learn the lessons. The only way we can save their lives is to teach them how to be safe around the water.
I took it towards an advocacy role to really look at how drowning is disproportionately impacting African American, Hispanic, Latino children, and really wanting to be a problem solver, really to make a difference.
You asked me why I came back. I came back from North Philadelphia. I came back for black kids in North Philadelphia, white kids in North Philadelphia. We had white kids that came down there because we had a product. And because they saw that we were inclusive, we wanted to be inclusive. It was about swimming, but it wasn't about swimming, but it was about swimming. That's the only tool we had.
In order for you to have environmental activism, you have to have social activism. Social justice and environmental justice, they go together.
What I wanted to do is bring it back to the Black experience, because I think those notions of Black people as historically being great swimmers have been lost. Africans were the greatest swimmers in the 12th century, 13th century, and before that, access to warm water, generational sport. So there's a rich history there that I wanted to just kind of touch on for the kids so that they would know that, you know, this is their history.
I'll be honest, people don't know it's structural racism. When you have a group of people that have been denied, purposefully denied in this space, you have to make it a social justice issue. It's a human rights issue as well.
In my mind, what can change, we need more facilities that can support swimming year-round. Our municipalities need to invest more money into those things. Something that can learn to swim, life-saving, first aid, lap swimming, competitive swimming, something that's accessible all year round.
Public pools can be that beacon to bring a community together, no matter what you look like, where you're from.
There were others before me, elite American swimmers who happened to be Black, and I can promise you there are more to come, hopefully many more. Today, I can say I'm an Olympic champion, the first Black woman to win an individual gold medal in swimming.
Wow, that was really great. Thanks. Thanks very much, Victoria. That's a hard act to follow from that, and also my friend Karen Young as well. Well, my name is Andy Cricken, and I'll try to follow that. First, many thanks to my friends Meg, Crystal, and Emma, and the entire Water Center team for the opportunity to participate. Really appreciate it, and also appreciate the work of the fellow panelists, those who you've just heard, and those to come. But my background is basically, as Crystal said, that I worked at a wastewater utility in Camden, New Jersey for many years. Camden is a very economically distressed community and environmental justice community. So I have some perspective what the community, of what the water utility can and should do, and also what a community deserves. In addition, I've served on the national level, the National Clean Water Agency Association, and also currently serving on the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. The way I see it is that, as Karen and Victoria have said, everybody is entitled to safe drinking water and clean water services, no matter where they live or what they look like, at an affordable rate. And that is really the key takeaway from what I wanted to say. That basically there are two sides of the environmental justice coin. The notion that everyone's entitled, that where you live, your zip code should not determine whether or not you have safe drinking water or clean waterways or access to clean waterways. And but it needs to be done at an affordable rate as well. So that's sort of the push and pull that a water utility has to focus upon. And the way I would see it, I don't know, Emma, if there's my slide, there we go, thanks. I would say that one of the initiatives I've worked on while serving on the National Association of Clean Water Agencies is the Clean Water Utility of the Future initiative, which is a program, a recognition program, requiring utilities to commit to striving to be anchor institutions in their community and striving to be environmental champions, to go above and beyond. And I would say that there are mainly 3 levels of water quality performance at a water utility that's striving to make a difference. The first is, as you see there, compliance. So the permit, complying with permits, complying with regulations. By doing that, the water utility, whether it be Philadelphia Water Department or Delcora and Chester on the Pennsylvania side, or Camden City in Camden County MUA on the New Jersey side, or anywhere in the country, meeting the permit requirements is critical and makes a huge difference. When the Clean Water Act was started in 1972, just 2 or 3 years before that, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland had caught on fire, and the water quality of the rivers and streams of the country were in very poor condition. So by meeting these new stringent standards, the water quality of for example, the Delaware River, where we all live, improved significantly through compliance. But compliance, for the notion of the Clean Water Utility of the Future, is that compliance shouldn't be the ceiling of aspirations, but rather should be the floor. That of course we ought to comply and meet all the permit requirements and regulations. And again, that shouldn't be sneezed at. It's a very significant environmental difference that has been made through compliance. But clean water utilities can also go beyond that. They can strive for super compliance. And what I mean by that is that they can do better than what the permit requires. They can remove more solids. They can go above and beyond what they're obliged to do. And for the Clean Water Utility of the Future, one of the notions is that the utility is committing that compliance is the floor of aspirations, that of course we'll comply, but we're striving to do better, striving to do the best that we can. And so, for example, at the wastewater utility that I used to work out in Camden, the Camden County MUA, our permit limit was 30 parts per million of solids that could go out the door. And when I left there in 2020, we were averaging about 5 parts per million. So it's significantly different, less. So I think we're only using about 25% of our solids allocation for the entire year, meaning that our zone of the Delaware River was cleaner. But then super compliance is definitely something to strive for, but going above and beyond that, really the ultimate goal of this Clean Water Utility of the Future initiative is that clean water utilities can and should strive to be environmental champions. That's what we're created to do, is to protect the public health and to protect the environment. And we should strive to be anchor institutions for the communities that we serve. And so, thinking locally, for example, what does that mean? So in Camden, Camden City being a very economic distressed community, our utility went above and beyond what we were required to do and actually assisted the city by helping them with their combined sewer system, which the city owned, not my utility, but we helped them anyway. And we helped them get funding, outside funding from the federal and state government to upgrade the combined sewer system. And then borrowing from the founder of the Water Center, Howard Newkrug, and his work in the Philadelphia Water Department, and getting help from people like Howard and Glenn Abrams, Mark Camerata, Mami Hara from the Philadelphia Water Department. We got assistance to try to copy what they had done in Philadelphia with respect to building green infrastructure to soak up stormwater in Camden and thereby reduce the potential for combined sewage flooding and combined sewer overflows. And the idea is that if you're serving as an anchor institution your goal is to optimize the quality of life for the people that you're serving. Of course, you have to stay within your legal lane as a water utility, but the goal is to try to see how you can widen that lane as much as possible so you can do as much good within your legal restrictions. So if stormwater capture and water quality is part of the zone of the water utility, why not do it in a way that optimizes public benefit like green infrastructure? And we went further because one of the things about Camden is that it's basically a peninsula, and that it's surrounded by water on three sides, the Delaware River and also the Cooper River and the Newton Creek coming in, tributaries going into the Delaware. And so we found that riverfront access and waterfront access was very critical to our community. And so we worked and developed with outside state funding and federal funding, we were able to get funding to create riverfront parks for our community in Camden. And basically the nexus was, again, because we were committed as an environmental champion and an anchor institution, then our mission isn't just to meet compliance with the treatment plan, which again is very important to the water quality of the Delaware River, but it's necessary, but more can be done than that. And so by striving to be an environmental champion and doing as much as we could to improve water quality by doing it and being invested in it and invested in the quality of life for the people that we were serving, then that opened up new kinds of projects. So for example, there was a brownfield site on the Delaware River near our treatment plant with contaminated soil, some of it radioactive, running off into the river. Plus that also comprised about 5 acres of impervious surface added to the combined sewage flooding problem within the city and resulting in contaminated overflow. When it rained, there would be runoff of this contaminated soil into the Delaware. But because our water utility was invested in environmentalism and protecting the river's water quality as much as we could, and providing, thinking about public benefit and looking at triple bottom line solutions, we were able to get funding from the state to demolish this factory, this abandoned factory, remove all the impervious surface, remove the contaminated soil, cap it, and then create a riverfront park for the community. And that was voted by the Environmental Council of the States as one of the 10 best uses of the federal state revolving fund funding source in the entire nation over the 30-year history of the program. Because we basically took a contaminated site, eliminated contaminated runoff, reduced combined sewage flooding, and provided a riverfront park for the community. And that is what a water utility can do when it has an intentionality of striving to optimize environmental benefit and community benefit. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion. And now I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Andy. Hello, everyone. First and foremost, thank you to the Water Center. Thank you to my panelists, and thank you to you viewers. This is a critical topic, and I am happy to be here, happy to be promoting this idea. So I'm going to jump right into it. My name is Dan Shupsky, using he, him. Presently, I'm a community outreach specialist in West Philly, and I engage with residents and community groups around a different kind of water equity, which is stormwater, through the city's Green City Clean Waters program. This program installs green stormwater infrastructure in neighborhoods to help drastically reduce the combined sewer overflows associated with our city. Happy to talk about that a little bit, but that's not the focus here. But it is a water equity thing in its own right. Focusing on the panel today, for me, water and equity are intertwined, just like social and environmental justice are intertwined. And when I was a varsity swimming coach at the University of Pennsylvania, I was presented with the opportunity to uplift and empower, to repair and include, to educate and engage with populations that were either purposely excluded or systematically excluded in the past. And we did this in the most fundamental and functional way that we could, which was helping to found We Can Swim with Clarissa Palmer, who will go right after me, and Mark Christian, the other varsity swimming coach at the time. We focused on a simple and profoundly powerful solution, providing access to high quality aquatics and swim instructor for free. So we knew the drowning disparity between children of color and their white peers. We knew about the diversity of in swimming and that being an issue. And we tried to come up with the most functional goal, the most functional program that we could, which was just providing swim lessons and inviting entire families from West Philly into the pool at Penn to check out the pool, to ease their toes in there, to have great student to instructor ratios and to get them swimming. So that program for us was the best way that we could all step in all together and start to course correct, really. It was an opportunity that I could not say no to help rewrite some of the wrongs that we all know happened and have happened for centuries everywhere globally. But here, this was our solution. And that's why I'm here on the panel. I'm very proud of We Can Swim. I'm very proud of Clarissa. I was her former coach. And our other co-founder, Mark, is not here, but also really proud to work alongside him. So looking forward to the panel. And Clarissa, welcome. And I'll kick it over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. First off, I want to say thank you to the Water Center, Meg, Crystal, and Emma for putting this important panel together. And yeah, so basically my life story is a prime example of the importance of equity in water. When I was 3 years old, I learned how to swim at the Dorchester YMCA. My parents are immigrants from Trinidad and Tobago. And when they first settled in America, they settled in a predominantly Black neighborhood, Dorchester, which is in Boston, Massachusetts. At the Dorchester YMCA, I actually learned how to swim from a Black man named Woody. And I was thinking about this the other day, and he was actually the first and only Black swim coach that I ever had in my 15 years of swimming. At the YMCA, I went from lessons to swimming on the swim team. And when I got to the swim team, the demographics were about 50% Black and brown kids and 50% white kids. Because Dorchester YMCA was in a predominantly Black neighborhood, funding wasn't the greatest. So the swim team fell apart after 3 or 4 years of me being on the team. It got to a point where my mom wanted to nourish the talent in swimming that she saw with me and my brother, that she used to go online and research different swim meets that are happening in the area and take us to these swim meets without having a coach affiliated with us. It got to a point where we were meeting other coaches and seeing the dynamics of other teams that we switched to be on a team called the South Shore YMCA Tiger Sharks. So yeah, from there, we started seeing less and less Black and brown kids as we started getting more elite and faster in swimming. It got to a point where when I was a junior in college at the University of Pennsylvania, that by my junior year, I only saw a handful of African-American women swimming in the Ivy League. And I had to ask myself, I started off swimming around a whole bunch of Black and brown children, but when I got to college, those numbers were no longer there. And I had to ask myself why. And I came up with the answers that accessibility was an issue, affordability was an issue, and the opportunity to swim in Black and brown neighborhoods was not there. And that's where the idea of We Can Swim was founded. I wanted We Can Swim to kind of be like what Dorchester YMCA was for me and my brother growing up. I wanted to be able to give Black and brown children the opportunity to learn how to swim without worrying about funds, without worrying about having to travel all over Philadelphia to try to find a pool. So that's where the idea of We Can Swim was built. My saying goes that I think that learning how to swim can save a life, but it can also change a life. My life is basically a prime example of that, because I think learning how to swim changed the trajectory of my life and gave me opportunities that I don't think would have been possible if I didn't learn that life-saving skill. And yeah, so We Can Swim teaches Black and brown children in West Philadelphia how to swim free of charge. To date, we have taught about 600 kids and counting. We have our season started March 19th, and we hope that we can continue combating the statistics within the Black and brown communities of children not learning how to swim one child at a time. So thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing your work. This is incredible. I'm sure so many of us are learning so much about this very important topic. And aside from my professional interest, this truly hits home as a Black woman, as a Black mother with young children. and just knowing how swimming is certainly something that is important to us, and yet in our culture it's looked at differently. And so I'm so grateful for all of you for talking about this issue. We want to ask our panelists to come back up on video, and we're going to now start our panel discussion. This is truly a powerful presentation, absolutely. Our audience, our viewers are commenting in the chat, and we just want to thank you. If you have questions, if you can begin putting them in the Q&A at this time, after I ask a few preset questions, we're going to then turn to our viewer questions. So I'm going to start with Karen again. Karen, can you tell me what is one of the greatest discoveries you were able to unveil in your exhibit on the history of segregation in pools?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Crystal. Just to clarify, are you asking what I discovered personally or what I discovered for our public? Because it's two different things.
I honestly would be interested in both, if you don't mind.
Okay. Museum work is all about storytelling, and Victoria has done a wonderful job of telling a story that has a quite painful history. And the exhibit brought up my own trauma with racism that I had actually sort of stored away, because it happened when I was much younger. And you sometimes just compartmentalize those things and you keep moving forward. You try to stay positive and be hopeful. And the exhibit had me realizing that the history that we talk about in the exhibition is also a current day occurrence. It has not stopped the violence that we see enacted on people who are just different than someone else. All we have to do is pick up our newspapers, listen to the news, and we see hate. We see something that really, it just amazes me that we're still in the place where we're having that kind of conversation. So the exhibit did that for me. It reminded me that this is not just my work. This is something that has happened to me. And I'm one of 40+ million African Americans. And if I have a story, and there are stories historically, I could just imagine if we don't have a direct story, we have an indirect story. And that story needs to have a proportional response to it. That trauma needs to have a proportional response to it. So that would be my personal sort of discovery. Sorry. And then on the professional side, what we've discovered is that the story is so rich. And if we go back to, the folks that helped to inspire us, and Victoria mentioned, names earlier, Dr. Wiltz, Dr. Jeff Wiltz, and Dr. Kevin Dawson. If you have an opportunity to read Dr. Dawson's book, Undercurrents of Power, and it talks about the rich history of the African diaspora, Africans being the best swimmers and being the best surfers and being the best canoe makers and canoers. We're not talking about, the movies that we see that depict, Europeans as being great surfers and swimmers, and Africans and African Americans just all afraid of water. It simply isn't true. And having that as something to hang on to is so important to young people who look like me. And it's important for us to bring that information out, and not just to the folks that look like me, but to the rest of the world that are sending out messages that quite honestly just aren't true, just aren't accurate. This exhibition tells the truth and does it in a way that I believe engages you in a conversation that can be honest and open, authentic, and hopefully change how we treat each other.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you for helping this come into fruition. As you mentioned, our stories are really important, and as we are talking about just how very vital water is to all of us, no matter what we look like, the stories are going to be the thing that gets us through. And so, Victoria, you definitely are quite the storyteller, very creative in all of your work in helping this pool exhibit come together. Do you have plans for other projects that will continue the conversation of water equity in our region after this exhibit ends, of course?
Yeah, well, just one thing, just to build on what Karen said, is that, conversations that Karen and I had as we were imagining the exhibition and dealing with various things, including the pandemic and budget cuts and all sorts of things that impacted the work, that we were talking. And one day, and I was really starting to just listen to Karen and some of the things that she was saying, with, that were being unearthed in her. And it really had me thinking about the images that we were using, because of course we were using historical images as well as contemporary images, and we wanted to juxtapose the two for sure. So many historical kind of storytelling and exhibitions can keep things lodged in the past and keep the trauma alive in a sense, and I definitely didn't want to do that. And so with Karen's insights and personal, I think, experiences, we really started to look at what kind of images and how we were even framing those images. So, were we always framing it so you're focused on the injury, the blood, the person who was actually being abused, or were you focusing on the people who were actually perpetrating it? And there's a very big shift. And so in the exhibition, you'll see a lot of Karen's influence in just our conversations. But to answer your specific question, all of my work is basically about water equity. I've been an environmental activist since I was 10 years old, and that's the truth, literally. And so there are many projects that are coming to fruition. Pool will be open for this summer and next summer. So we hope that both seasons will have, really interesting activations for people to engage with. We have the magazine. So there are lots of conversations that are going to keep, jumping off from the actual exhibition. And Clarissa, I'm so glad to actually meet you and to hear some of your stories, because you're in we mentioned you in the exhibition, and of course we can swim, so it's so nice to actually meet you in person. And thank you so much for what you're doing. But so the other projects, Crystal, that we have going, Karen and I have another big thing happening, a floating classroom. The floating classroom actually is connected to this work, which you may not think immediately, but it is. Just getting people out on the water. We have a floating classroom that just received a good amount of funding, and we're hoping to bring to fruition soon. It's called the Floating Water Workshop. It'll be a classroom on the Schuylkill and the Delaware, and with the Fairmont Waterworks and the Philadelphia Water Department and others. And we are trying to create a threshold. So a way for people to get on the water in a very safe way, a way that we can start to almost use as a threshold for, more personal experiences on the water. So we are, even with the design and the engineering of the floating classroom, to have it be really shallow, so you're very close to the water. And so we see that really as an important way to create a connection with our water bodies. There's no better way than getting someone on the water to have them, want to protect it or be involved in it or continue with some of the amazing aquatic activities that you can do. And then I have other projects throughout the city, including at Juniata Park, a project that's targeting 3 to 5 year olds and engaging them with water sculptures, and really just through play, but also through storytelling, and relating it back to some of this watershed work. But there are other things happening too.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Meg Maffett, Director of Strategic Development at the Water Center. Sorry to say that Crystal somehow got bumped off. So unintended here, but I'm going to keep this going until Crystal can get back on. So Andy, next question is for you. How are water leaders making real change happen to tackle the urgency and size of our water equity issues in the US, both recreationally and beyond?
Thanks, Meg. One of the two key challenges is that there's a very significant infrastructure gap. The American Society of Civil Engineers graded our water infrastructure at a C-, which was up from a D+. I mean, that's just completely inadequate. And that's drinking water and wastewater. So there's a very significant infrastructure gap, from aging infrastructure. And then add to that, the challenges of climate change only exacerbate things. And you see things like combined sewage flooding, stormwater flooding, even in separate areas, lead in drinking water, drought out in the West. And you see that there's a very significant infrastructure gap. And then because it's costly to repair those things, it requires rate increases and funding. And so all of these things are a problem for everyone, but especially for more vulnerable, low-income, environmental justice communities and households, because and more often than not, they're in low-lying areas like in New Orleans, where we saw Hurricane Katrina disproportionately burdened, communities of people of color. You see that the aging infrastructure tends to be in lower income communities. Older, renters are more vulnerable to lead because they're the ones that are they don't own the home, and yet so the landlord isn't drinking the water, the renter is, and renters tend to be people with low income. So again and again, you see a disproportionate burden on low income people, and of course, rate increases are disproportionately harder for people with lower income. So the way to challenge, the way the water utility leaders are getting at this problem, how to ensure that everybody, as I was saying at the beginning, is entitled to safe drinking water and clean waterways at an affordable rate. How do we do the one without harming the other on the rate side? And one key thing is looking for outside funding. And there is funding available, like in Pennsylvania, it's PennVest, New Jersey, the New Jersey Infrastructure Bank. When I was in Camden, we were able to use funding from that to significantly upgrade our entire wastewater treatment plant, build green infrastructure in the city, put netting systems at the end of our combined sewer overflows to prevent solids going into the Delaware River during rain events, and do that without raising rates because we're getting funding. So the way to sort of get a virtuous cycle is to get outside funding to the extent possible to try to improve services while keeping the rate steady and reducing the rate burden. But the most important thing I would say, Meg, is there needs to be an intentionality. If the old paradigm of utility leaders was meet the permit, stay away from the public, stay away from regulators and the newspapers, with the new paradigm, this notion of being an environmental champion, being an anchor institution, there's that intentionality, then water utilities are problem solvers. And if that's their mission, the mission is to help the environment and help the community, then they'll come up with better solutions, which is what they're doing across the country.
That's great. Thank you so much, Andy. All right, and Clarissa.
Meg, just one thing that seems like the really great connection between Andy and Dan and Clarissa's work too,
Yeah.
because when I was doing research for the pool project and looking into things like Hurricane Katrina, and when you look back at that and the number of drownings, that it just puts an exclamation point on how important learn to swim programs are.
Absolutely.
Learn to swim programs in urban environments, especially with the changing weather patterns, and so it goes back to our public pools.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. All right. So let's see. Clarissa, your question is, according to the Centers for Disease Control, drowning is the second leading cause of childhood death in the United States. And over 70% of African-American children and 60% of Latino children have not yet learned to swim. Why do you think this staggering statistic remains so prevalent in these communities?
Yes. So the short answer to that question is generational trauma. So to expand on that, back in like the 1930s, 1940s, when public pools are starting to become more prevalent in the United States, Black people weren't allowed to access these pools, right? There was a lot of racist notions back then that one, Black people, if you're in the water with them, you can get a disease by being in the same water as Black people. There was also the notion that particularly African-American men should not be in bathing suits around Caucasian women who were also in bathing suits. So all these reasons are reasons why they try to keep African-Americans out of pools. Now, if African-Americans were to access these pools, they would also do things like put nails at the bottom of the pool. So their feet would get cut when they're touching the bottom of the pool. They would throw acid, they would throw bleach, or they went so far as to be physically violent with these African-Americans to get them out of the pool. Now, if you experience that, would you want to go swimming? No. So then when you have children, you don't want to put them in that environment. So you're not teaching them how to swim. You're not putting them in lessons how to swim. You also have the problem of they're not really building pools in African-American communities. So you don't really have access to learn how to swim, even if you wanted to break that generational trauma link. And then if you do have a pool in your neighborhood, it might be a private pool where you have to pay a lot of money to then get access to this pool to learn how to swim. So all these factors are pushing against African Americans and Latino children to the point where their parents don't want to go through that, so they're not teaching them how to swim. And then the cycle just continues on, where when they're having kids, they're not putting them in lessons. So basically, to fight these statistics, there's going to have to be programs like We Can Swim, or individuals like the person who taught me how to swim, Woody, that want to break this generational trauma link and to help the community learn these life-saving skills.
Yeah, excellent, really fabulous response. Yes, yes, there you go. Okay, and then Dan, let's see. So how does We Can Swim attract participants, and could the program be expanded elsewhere? And I think someone already in the audience asked a similar question.
Sure, happy to touch on that. Meg, just a small curveball. Clarissa, I'm really proud of you. I just wanted to say that publicly. As her former coach, it's amazing to be on a panel with her. Her story is, you know, I'm like literally getting moved a little bit over here. So I'm really proud of you. I'm really happy to be here with you. And I wanted to just take a moment to like link what we're all sort of saying, right? Andy's talking about utilities, and we have a museum and informational public perspective. We have a swim lesson, but you know, it's underscoring this idea, like when there's systemic bad that is really terrible, you must have systemic good to combat that. You know what I mean? Like we've all sort of touched on this personally and professionally, and utilities and swim lessons. Like this systemic bad, this injustice was so wrong and so bad that the only way to literally combat this is to change the culture with systemic good. And I really like, I heard Andy say that, I heard Karen say that, Victoria's saying that, Clarissa's saying that. You know, it's just worth underscoring that, you know, for me and We Can Swim, being, you know, having an opportunity to right a wrong in my own little corner of the world was really powerful. You know, and I really thank Clarissa for pulling us and Mark in, our other co-founders in here. So I just want to sort of underscore that. But to get to your question, we are promoting this in the best places. And so we went to look at the schools. And what we did transparently is we looked at schools that were underperforming in West Philadelphia. And we know about these factors, and we don't need to go into this information. It's all there. It's environmental justice. It's on all of our maps. It's on school district schools. It's on budgets. It's on housing value. It's in everything is pointing back to this area. And we knew we needed to go to these schools and grab these kids because they were the ones. So we did presentations to schools. We used social media. We got email addresses. We used our reach from social media. Once we started getting our page up and running, we're using local media. We're using panels like this. We're talking to Victoria. We're talking to the Water Center. So we are doing anything and everything that we can to make sure that the right audience is in the pool, and they should be there. So, and then to talk about expansion really quickly, I absolutely think this can be expanded. You know, there's a lot of nuts and bolts that we don't probably have time to get into, but we had the right people in the right place, and that was very helpful, right? I was the aquatics director at the time. The other assistant coach had a good connection with USA Swimming, and Clarissa was our undergrad connection, varsity athlete connection to the student body and student population. So you need to have the right players in place. You need to have the right facility. We do background checks on all of our instructors, right? You need to make sure that everything's in order. But once you can grab that funding, and once you can get internal support, for us, We Can Swim started off non-SAC funded, which is internal to Penn. It's almost like you have to do this probationary period before you can get money from the University of Pennsylvania to have a long life as a club, right? Any club can get this SAC funding. But for 5 years, we did not have that funding. So we did fundraising, and we had friends, and we had help, and we reached out to our community, and there were swim coaches. So this is kind of a long answer. I absolutely think it can be replicated. Clarissa and I have talked about it being replicated, and the replication should occur in the same exact place in New York City, like as West Philly, right? The same exact place in Atlanta, the same exact place in Los Angeles, right? So, you know, I'll keep it short. I know we're running on time, but thank you, and you know, appreciate all of you and this conversation.
That is really great. We really appreciate that, Dan. And I do believe, as I'm not Crystal and didn't have everything lined up exactly the way she did, but I think that our last slide is going to have the contact information for each of you. So for those of you in the audience who are interested in perhaps learning more and maybe tapping Dan and or Clarissa's brain about how they got it all started, I think you should be able to do that. So definitely, it's just such an amazing program. And if it can be expanded, we are certainly at the Water Center all for it. So we only have about 5 minutes left. So I want to see if I can get to at least a couple of the questions in the Q&A. And this one, I think I'll direct over here to you, Andy. It says, what are some examples of activities that help achieve super compliance? And within those activities, what external resources or partners are most critical to help utilities achieve that?
Thanks, Matt. Meg, one thing real quickly, I just want to put a shout out to my fellow panelists and their amazing stories, so inspiring. And so I feel honored to listen. And I just want to say a quote that I really love that just reminds me of what has been said here. It's from George Eliot, and it's that the greater good of the world is largely due to unhistoric acts by dedicated men and women who may dwell in unvisited tombs. I mean, this idea that, you know, maybe it won't be, you know, there's all sorts of history going, you know, we're seeing history being made before our eyes in Europe and everything, but these unhistoric acts that all of my fellow panelists are doing, and probably many listeners, you know, making a difference for people that may never get in the history books, but it adds more to the greater good than one may ever know. So thanks, and hats off to everyone. Real quick, to answer that question, I would say 4 things real quickly. The easiest thing, or not the easiest, but the most obvious thing is plant optimization. The plant, you know, these plants are able, these wastewater treatment plants are able to do more than just meet the permit. Like, they're designed to do better. And so if there's an intentionality, if the intentionality is just meet the permit, well, then that's what you'll get. But there's an intentionality that we should be an environmental champion, and you can set the plant and size the plant so that it actually produces more solids and has better water quality impacts. You can also, I mean, make sure that it's more resilient against power outages and climate change by, you know, getting off the grid. Philadelphia and Camden's plants have put in like solar panels and biogas projects so that the plant in Camden runs on solar and biosolids. It doesn't need electricity. So there's a power outage, the plant keeps running, and so we can protect the river. And that's an intentionality, not required to do it, but it's something that you can do if you have this intentionality of being an environmental champion. You know, green infrastructure like Green City Clean Waters in Philadelphia and the Green Infrastructure Program in Camden is also a voluntary thing to try to, you know, come up with a stormwater solution that also has environmental benefit above and beyond what is required. And lastly, I'll say peer-to-peer initiatives in which more resourced utilities can help underserved communities through shared services, through knowledge sharing, so that we can help. If you're invested in helping your community, you can actually, you know, provide assistance. Like the way Philadelphia helped me when I worked in Camden, or the way I helped the city of Camden when I was there as well. This idea of sharing knowledge and sharing information is a way to go above and beyond what you're obliged to do. And the partners, you can first of all is find, you know, public sector utilities are willing and wanting to share information. Whereas if McDonald's do something, they're not going to let Burger King know, but public sector communities utilities are willing to share. And so that there's those partners. And also the most important thing, I think, outside funding. And lastly, the community, making sure that you're finding out what the community wants and needs and getting their special knowledge about their communities is essential as well.
Thank you. That was great, Andy. Really appreciate that. And, you know, I mean, so we have some other good questions that I think are going to take longer than we actually have to answer, but I'm just going to bring it back to We Can Swim just to kind of to close it out. And that is one of the questions here. And just talking about for We Can Swim team, what were some surprising challenges you encountered in setting up We Can Swim? I know that you mentioned funding being a big challenge, as it always is, I think, for any startup organization, but anything else that you can illuminate in that? And then I'd love to move on so that we can share your contact information and make sure that everybody can follow up on this really important discussion.
Clarissa, you want to go? You want me to? Go ahead. Yeah.
I guess for me, the biggest surprise and kind of in the beginning was I really did not know where to start. I had an idea. I knew what community I wanted to serve, but I didn't know where to start in order to get kids in the door. And one thing that Dan told me is just hit the ground running. So I literally would, after class, go to Lee Elementary. There was another school, Huey Elementary, and one more school. It's slipping, the name of the school is, Comegys.
Yeah.
Comegys. And I would go there and literally talk to the teachers, talk to the parents, talk to the kids. And that I surprised myself in that sense because I didn't know I was capable of doing that. And when we first started, we started off with, I think, about 13 children. So we were small when we began. But that was the hardest part that was surprising to me is I know there's a need, but where do I get started in helping in the community? So, yeah.
Yeah, I would just complement that with I'm on the other end of the spectrum in that if you're trying to start a program, you need to know if the institution and what it's like on the inside and try to anticipate some silo issues, right? Communications, directors, different managers, insurance, facilities, right? Recreation, money flow, right? So try to do a little homework before you hit that ground running so that you're ready for institutional roadblocks that aren't there intentionally, but just maybe they're even in a lack of information flow or people don't know what they're doing in other sectors of a really large organization. So at a 50,000 foot level, that would be my surprising. We ran into those all the time. We had to overcome them all the time.
Well, gosh, I can't thank you all enough. This has just been such an inspiring, insightful discussion. And it really, I hope that the audience has enjoyed it as much as we have. As I mentioned, we do have some contact information here for all of you who I think every single speaker had fascinating things to say. And if you all would like to contact them for follow-up questions, information, please do so. That's here. And our wonderful moderator, Crystal, while she unfortunately had some technical difficulties, she is actually back. You can't see her, but she can communicate with us. So I am going to turn it over to her now for closing remarks. And thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Meg. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our viewers. Thank you so much for attending. I wish I could see you at this point, but technology. So this program has been recorded and it will be available on the Water Center's website tomorrow. You will receive a feedback survey. I think Emma has placed that in the chat box. So if you take a few minutes to fill it out, we'll know how to improve our future programming. Finally, I would like to thank Emma Dennison, our Communications and Student Coordinator, as well as Meg Moffitt, Director of Strategic Development. They have been instrumental in not just planning the event, but of course, Meg stepping in today. So thank you both. Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you everyone for making this such a terrific program. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and please stay connected to the Water Center.